The first hour after waking holds a quiet kind of power that most people rarely stop to consider. It does not announce itself loudly, nor does it demand recognition, but its influence reaches farther than we often realize. In those early moments, the mind is still fluid, still impressionable, still open to direction before the force of the outside world begins to shape it. Yet this very openness, which could be used to establish clarity, steadiness, and intention, is so often surrendered without thought. Many people give these moments away to distraction, to unexamined habit, to digital noise, to mental clutter, or to the unconscious inertia that carries them from sleep into activity without ever allowing them to truly arrive in the day. But those early minutes are not empty, they are formative. They contain the possibility of shaping not just the next hour, but the emotional tone, the mental rhythm, and the quality of attention that will continue unfolding long after the morning has passed. The Stoics understood that mastery over the mind is not something achieved only in dramatic moments of adversity. It is built in ordinary moments, especially in those moments when the mind is most open to being guided. And in the first hour after waking, that kind of mastery is unusually close at hand. Every small decision made there, every conscious breath, every act of intentional rising, every moment in which you choose awareness rather than autopilot, begins to ripple outward into the way you think, feel, and act for the rest of the day. Even something as simple as rising with intention, breathing slowly, or noticing the changing light in a room carries more significance than people usually give it credit for. These acts seem minor only because they are familiar, but familiarity often hides importance. As the body begins to awaken, the brain also begins to reorganize itself for wakefulness. Neural activity shifts, hormonal rhythms begin to rise, attention starts to gather itself after the looseness of sleep. Energy, focus, and perception begin moving into alignment. If these moments are claimed consciously rather than surrendered automatically, they become the beginning of something profound. The morning turns into more than a routine. It becomes a quiet exercise in sovereignty. It becomes a rehearsal for the kind of relationship you will have with the rest of the day. It becomes a reminder that self-governance is not abstract. It is expressed in small acts repeated with care. By approaching the first hour deliberately, you are not merely starting the day, you are deciding what kind of day it will be, and perhaps more importantly, what kind of person you will be within it. When the alarm first rings, the body is often suspended between two worlds. Sleep has not fully released its hold, and waking has not yet completely asserted itself. The mind, in that threshold, remains highly suggestible. Thought is soft, less rigid, less defended, and more susceptible to whatever enters first. This is precisely why those first moments matter, yet many people immediately resist them. They press snooze, seeking a few more minutes of comfort, hoping for one last extension of ease before responsibility begins. But that extra drifting does not restore clarity. More often, it fragments it. It draws the mind back into a half-state that leaves the body slower, the thoughts cloudier, and the emotions more reactive. Instead of awakening into direction, one emerges into confusion. But imagine something different. Imagine that the first action of your day is not hesitation, but intention, not force, not performance, not artificial motivation, but a clear act of self-command. The choice to rise becomes a message, not from pressure, but from your deeper self. It says that the day will not begin by accident. It says that you will meet the day rather than be dragged into it. This single act interrupts the unconscious patterns that so often dictate how a morning unfolds. It creates a break in habit and allows consciousness to enter before routine has a chance to take over. The moment you stand, something subtle but powerful begins to happen. The body shifts from the softness and passivity of the bed to the firmness and stability of the floor. The senses begin to register the world again. Light becomes noticeable. Air becomes noticeable. The spine lengthens. The lungs expand. The body, which only moments earlier was suspended in stillness, begins to awaken into posture, weight, balance, and motion.
These are not only physical sensations, they are cues that the mind receives and interprets. They begin re-establishing the connection between awareness and embodiment. To stand up with intention is not merely to leave the bed, it is to move from passivity into agency. It is to begin the day by participating in it instead of delaying it. The eyes take in light, the skin registers temperature, the breath deepens almost automatically. This interaction between body and environment is ancient. It is not something modern people invented. It is part of the deeper intelligence by which the body prepares itself for engagement with life. Light entering through the eyes signals the brain that it is time to organize itself for alertness. Hormonal processes begin adjusting. Cortisol rises in a healthy morning rhythm, not as panic but as readiness. The body prepares not for stress alone, but for participation. Even the smallest exposure to natural light can help synchronize the internal systems that govern energy, mood, and wakefulness. A minute outside, or even a few moments facing the morning, can begin aligning the body's rhythms with the actual day, rather than with the artificial patterns of interruption and distraction. That is why the simple act of stepping into the light has more significance than it appears to have. It is not just symbolic, it is physiological, psychological, and philosophical all at once. The body responds instinctively. The retina detects brightness and sends signals directly into the systems that regulate circadian rhythm, alertness, and hormonal balance. This begins preparing the mind and body for coherent activity rather than fragmented wakefulness. Dopamine begins its subtle work in motivation and attention. Serotonin contributes to emotional balance. The cortisol awakening response rises naturally and helps prepare the body for action. These ancient rhythms are often obscured by modern habits, by dark rooms, artificial screens, delayed mornings, and reactive starts, but they are still there, waiting to be engaged. To step into light is to align with something older and wiser than habit. It is to cooperate with the body's design rather than interfere with it. And beyond the physical effects, there is also something inwardly clarifying about it. Light gives form to the room. It gives edges to perception. It tells the mind that the world has begun again and that it may begin again with it. What was vague becomes visible. What was dormant becomes available. The act of standing in morning light becomes a way of telling both the body and the mind that the day will be entered consciously. Movement deepens this process even further. Even very small amounts of movement can begin changing the quality of the morning in measurable and meaningful ways. A few stretches, a slow walk, several push-ups, a series of mindful breaths, or simply the act of moving with awareness rather than collapsing into a chair or a screen. All of this changes the trajectory of wakefulness. Blood begins to circulate more fully. Oxygen delivery increases. The sluggishness that lingers in the brain after sleep begins to lift. The prefrontal cortex, so important for focus, judgment, planning, and emotional regulation, becomes more active. Neurotransmitters begin shifting in ways that support alertness, motivation, and mood. What seemed like a dull, resistant beginning can transform into steadiness and readiness just through a few minutes of intentional motion. This is not because exercise is magical, but because the body and mind were never meant to awaken into passivity alone. The human system responds to movement with clarity. When movement is paired with breath, the effects become even more powerful. Breath anchors awareness. Motion directs energy. Together, they create a state in which the mind begins to return fully to the present. Tension leaves the body more quickly. Attention gathers itself more easily. Emotion becomes less sticky and more fluid. A person who moves with awareness in the morning is not simply exercising. They are rehearsing agency. They are teaching the mind and body to cooperate in wakefulness rather than drift apart into fragmentation. The Stoics would have recognized something deeply familiar in this. They understood that virtue and self-command were expressed not only in abstract thought, but in disciplined action. They knew that the body and mind were not enemies, but partners in the practice of living well. To move deliberately first thing in the morning is to remind yourself that your life is not merely something that happens to you. It is something you participate in through action. Even the smallest act of physical effort becomes a statement. It says that comfort will not rule the opening of the day. It says that the first movement belongs to you, not to inertia. This kind of practice cultivates resilience in quiet ways. It strengthens the link between intention and embodiment. It establishes a rhythm that will continue influencing the hours ahead. A person who begins the day by moving with awareness tends to think differently later, respond differently later, and feel differently later, because the body has already been shown that the day is to be entered actively, not reluctantly. Controlled discomfort, especially in the form of brief cold water exposure, extends this principle in a particularly vivid way. Cold water is not important because it is fashionable or extreme. It is important because it creates a concentrated encounter with discomfort in a safe and deliberate setting. The initial shock is undeniable. The skin reacts immediately. The breath catches. The mind is forced into presence because it cannot remain vague in the face of sudden sensation. In that moment, the usual drift of thought